And welcome back. Now, yesterday, embattled power utility Eskom said that it could not guarantee that load shedding will soon be a thing of the past. However, Eskom chairperson Jabu Mabuza has vowed that measures have been put in place to avoid a total blackout. Now, in a joint press conference with Public Enterprises Minister Pravin Gordhan, they conceded that the lack of maintenance of power stations has been the main cause of breakdowns in power supply. And also coming out yesterday, the joint meeting of Parliament's Standing Committee on Finance and Public Accounts, as well as public administration, that has forced Steinhoff to reveal the names of those implicated individuals, which resulted in the company losing 20 billion rand in share value. Now, the 8 names of those implicated in the report from audit firm PwC include the former CEO Markus Jooste and former Chief Financial Officer Ben Le Grange. And let's get some analysis on this now. And joining us via Skype is political analyst Khaya Sithole, and in studio with me, Sandile Swana, who's an independent governance expert. Gentlemen, good morning and thanks for coming through, both of you.
Thank you and good morning to the listeners.
Now, I want to start for a change with Steinhoff before we talk about the obvious Eskom situation. Now, Steinhoff, the PwC report that was released, first it was an 11-page summary of that report that was released, at which shareholders actually balked and they said, no, we want the entire picture, which I understand is a more than 400-page document that was actually presented. And the net result of that is that people have been implicated. Markus Jooste, former CEO, the former CFO Ben Le Grange. But let's talk about this. 20 billion rand in share value wiped out. Sandile.
Thank you, Sakina. First of all, we can talk about the 20 billion rand, but the reality of it, if we accept that it was fraudulently created in the first place, so it was not true value, it was fictitious value, fraudulent value created, and people invited to come and invest in this scheme. So there's a lot of oversight, a lot of checking that was not being done. The asset managers who were buying these shares, including the PIC, analysts, various types of highly trained financial analysts in South Africa have been duped by this scheme. And it also points to a very big problem which we're not getting around, where people make decisions on audited financial statements which are untruthful. So those would be my initial remarks, that how many of these Steinhoffs are out there on the JSE with audited, clean audits every year, but at the end of the day you discover later on that these were inflated figures. There's a lot of shenanigans going on. So to me, that is the governance side of this is a very big problem, and the asset management industry and their associates need to actually answer much more fully about what do they do, because questions were asked about these figures. This superlative performance of Steinhoff was questioned, and international experts were called in to look into this, and they gave Steinhoff a clean bill of health several times.
So now we know that that figure was inflated by around 100 billion rand. So this is the extent to which, at least we are told, they inflated the value of this business. But you speak about, the governance issues, Sandile. Khaya, what about the criminality that is implicit in what has happened at Steinhoff?
So good morning to the listeners. And I think when we talk about the criminal aspect of this entire exercise, you have to imagine that in order to perpetrate fraud of such a large scale, there has to be explicit collusion between the people that are involved in the process. So this wasn't a clerical error where somebody put an extra zero in 1 year, but this was a coordinated effort at deceiving not only the shareholder, but also other stakeholders. So I think the criminal issues here are very clear for anyone to see. And what also came through yesterday and over last week, Friday, is that when Steinhoff says that they do not want to release the names of the individuals that are implicated, it is because they have taken the decision that they want to pursue criminal charges, and they feel that disclosing the names might actually jeopardize the entire process. But of course, that assumption seems to be ill-conceived, because it's not like these individuals' names would have been difficult to imagine. All somebody had to do is simply just read, and you'd know when they mention the executives of this nature who they are.
Well, our apologies there. That signal just breaking up somewhat there to Kaya Sitole. We'll try and fix it as well. Sandile Swana, and many people would perhaps say, well, this is a private entity, and therefore, you know, what they do and how they handle this is up to that entity. But that's not the case, because people lost money here. Ordinary South Africans lost their pensions as a result of this fraud.
Yeah, I think let's clear up that misconception. When there are different types of companies. You have a private company and you have a public company. When you go and you start listing your company on the JSE and other stock exchanges, or you build a company of a certain number of shareholders, it becomes a public company in the first place. And the Companies Act itself, before you even go to the requirements of the JSE, is very clear about the type of transparency and accountability that you need to be held to. So people cannot say that is a private company in the sense that is my little smallanyana business in the township somewhere. That's not what we're talking about here. And more importantly, most of these so-called big companies, actually the people who buy those shares are asset managers, pension funds, and those types of people. So the ordinary person in the street actually has shares on the JSE. So even in Steinhoff, a lot of the public servants and a lot of ordinary people, Sasol pension funds, actually own shares there. So somebody cannot say that they want to keep this thing a secret when people have put in their own money. And the people who are even saying we want to release this information, they may not even as invested in the same company as the ordinary public out there. So I think that story we can't listen to. And the last other thing that I want to add to this is that this fraud at Steinhoff was carried on over a long period of time. At least from 2009, if I remember correctly, that already started these frauds, and it was just continuing to pull people in. So I support the view that full disclosure, and Parliament was correct, and I'm very encouraged that Parliament was correct in saying release all the information to all the authorities and let full investigations continue.
So let's ask the question we always ask when public servants are involved. When and why haven't we seen any arrests as yet in the Steinhoff matter, Kaya?
I think, of course, the big problem we have in the country is that the capacity of our law enforcement agencies to even understand the nature of white-collar crime remains severely diminished. And I think when you then look at the nature of the fraud that we talk about here, it's probably the most complex case that you'd ever have to put in front of them. And we've seen that because they struggled even the most simplest of cases, this is probably just beyond their pay grade. So what you're hoping to see is that perhaps the MPA, for example, actually acknowledges that this is perhaps the most complex and the most important investigation they might undertake, and then reach out to people who are specialists in this field and say, you will come in on an ad hoc basis and actually assist us to ensure that we get prosecution. But to simply leave our law enforcement agencies, decimated as they are, to try and figure this out on their own would simply mean that very few people, if any, would ever get prosecuted.
Well, that's a bit sour, I must say, but I guess that's the pill we have to swallow. And coming to Eskom now, and let me start with yesterday's press conference that was held by Minister Pravin, Gordhan and Jabu Mabuza, the board chairperson of Eskom. There was an explicit apology. We apologize to the nation for what's happening. But then, now government is planning stage 5 and 6 load shedding, and this in order to prevent a national blackout or a collapse of the grid. Sandile Swana, firstly, the apology. And secondly, what are we to make of all of this? Because we hear about planning and, you know, more people being brought on board in order to capacitate Eskom, but we don't seem to be getting to a solution one way or another.
Let me start off by saying, Sakina, that actually the stage 5 and stage 6 was entailed in the presentation by Jabu Mabuza and the minister. It was entailed. It was clear that it's coming. The apology, this is not the first apology. The first apology was issued by Thabo Mbeki, when he apologized for neglecting the report submitted in December 1998 by Dr. Penuel Maduna and Eskom to the cabinet of Thabo Mbeki at the time. That report they submitted in December 1998 was a result of a consultation process that started in 1995 to plan for electricity supply in South Africa for the coming years, and it ended. So a lot of time immediately after independence was spent to plan so that we don't run short of electricity to where we are. And Penuel Maduna and his team had predicted that by 2007 we're going to have load shedding. And in 2007 we started having load shedding as predicted. So what that tells you is that these things are predictable. We can know exactly what's going to happen next. But our government, including the cabinet of Thabo Mbeki, did not take action. Then the boards, the cabinet of Zuma and the boards of Eskom never followed up in the manner that Penuel Maduna had said. Just to make a simple statement, they wanted to build 2 power stations. They started in the year that Penuel Maduna had said that the load shedding is going to start, which is and one power station was going to take at least 5 years to build. And they are on one power station, I believe, 5 years behind schedule, over and above the original planned 5 years, the other 7, and the budget in both has at least trebled. So that's one source of the problem that we knew long ago in the 90s where we're going to be in terms of electricity supply.
But not only has the budget trebled, we are now hearing about design flaws at these power stations, and that again speaks to another problem, because how do you design something? You have the cost overruns, you are way behind schedule, and still we have to deal with design flaws in the construction of this thing. So what's supposed to happen?
The issue of design flaws, at least I was taught design, and I am doing my PhD on design now. Now, the issue of design is exactly that when you are going to build, you have a design that you test, that on paper this thing works. When you are building, every module that you finish, you test it against the design that is working. You cannot say at the end of the day when you are supposed to commission and say there's a design flaw. That tells us that there is a big problem of whether we're using people who are not trained in design or whatever the case is, but I think there is something that we're not being told here. There is a need for a full disclosure. What is the meaning that there are design flaws? How did they come about? Who brought this about? Americans were brought in there. You will remember that this issue of power stations and what have you, Edison was an American, Westinghouse was an American. This issue of electrification in the manner that we see it, by and large, is an American concept. And today, Americans come and they don't know how to build. The very first green paper and the white paper that was published was supported by the Americans for the electricity supply in this country. And we have been acknowledged in the world that we master coal power stations as South Africans. We have been an award, Eskom has been an award winning, within recent memory, within this independence period, an award winning utility. But today we can't even build a design and build a coal-fired power station, electricity station. So to me, the information is incomplete, and they need to actually get their technical people to actually explain what do they mean by this language, because the ordinary South African cannot understand this.
So the planning has been defective. We are hearing that no maintenance is really taking place as it should. Money is being spent, and a lot of money at that. We're talking billions of rands. And now we're hearing about this threat of a national shutdown, a national collapse of the grid, Kaya, and also about diesel. If we don't get the diesel, it went from coal, now it's diesel. And as Sandile says, we need full disclosure here at some point about what is really going on with Eskom. But do you think the people who are running this or trying to find the solutions actually know what is going on at Eskom?
Look, Sakina, the great reality is that clearly the people that are trying to brief us on what's happening at Eskom either have absolutely no idea what it is that they're trying to say, or maybe they keep getting the information on a piecemeal basis and then trying to construct a story around it. In fact, one of the big stories that came out yesterday is that suddenly they realized that the contract for monitoring their boilers, as they call them, expired 18 months ago and nobody has bothered to renew that contract. Now, clearly, this means that contract management is not in place then, and you've got the CEO and you've got the chief operating officer coming to a country and saying that one of the most key parts of our supply chain, which is just the ability to monitor what it is that's going on here, a contract expired 18 months ago and we haven't found a way to renew it, or we forgot about it. Now, that unfortunately amounts to gross incompetence. There's just no other way to explain it. And I think the way the stories keep shifting, where for a moment we thought coal was the issue, and then suddenly last week it was the Mozambican shortage that became the issue, and then suddenly today the country is out of diesel. It simply means that we are not being given information in a coherent manner. So they might not be explicitly intending to lie to us, but the way the information is filtering out is that every single day you have to latch on to the version that they give you, and the next day there's a different version to it, which really means that it's now difficult to actually take anything that they say seriously. So I do think that the key issue here is that we need to go back and ask a couple of simple questions. What is the country's capacity to generate electricity? What is the country's usage of electricity? And how big is the gap? So when you then move from one stage to the next, we need to be explicitly told that our capacity is 10,000, for example. The current usage is 9,000. Here's one boiler, or here's one station that has gone down. That station's contribution is 200 or 300 megawatts, and therefore this is why we're activating load shedding. So for them to simply say, wait for 14 days and find out what happens, and then maybe this might take 2 years, and then to keep waffling on about the state capture phenomenon, I think even that part of the story is losing currency, because people are saying, okay, we understand money was stolen, but tell us what the reality of what's going on every single day is. And clearly that story is just not very well understood by the management of Eskom and the board.
Okay, so let us very humbly try and find a solution or a way forward here. How do we move forward on the Eskom situation?
We need the truth, and I'm not sure we're going to get it from these guys.
Yeah, the fact of the matter is that this one of diesel is the most expensive solution. But it can work, but people need to understand that that's the most expensive way of dealing with this. Then you need to go to these so-called independent power producers. If they've got capacity, that capacity has got to be brought online very, very speedily.
But can it? Were we not told it's about 5 years or so? So yes, the money is being spent, but how soon can they realistically come online to basically boost the grid?
Their own lobby groups over the weekend were saying that some of them would be able to come online and actually provide the service. Because where you are now, it's like if there was a shortage of water, you are used to buying water at 10 rands a litre, bottled water. The price, if there's a shortage of water, the price becomes a non-issue at a certain point. You just want the actual water. So what I'm saying is that that work, which is independent of Eskom, needs to be speeded up and concluded. The other unfortunate thing that I have to also mention is that whilst Jabu Mabuza says we need to act with emergency and speed and all that, the problem with what he is saying that we need to guard against is a situation where we go on procurement avenues of multi-billion rand procurement processes that are done on a scribbler.
Okay, I'm going to pause you there. Kaya, stay with us. We're going to take the 7 o'clock news and then we will come back to continue this, because there are other issues that I want to touch on as well that we haven't had time to. So please stay with us. Sandile Swana and Kaya Sitole, our analysts this morning, will come back and touch on Eskom and other stories as well. It's time now for the 7 o'clock news.